Hello, I'm Dr. John Kruse, and today I'm not going to be talking particularly about ADHD. I'm going to be talking about connection in a time of COVID. So I'm going to start with some general information and then move on to some strategies or tips to hopefully help reduce a sense of loneliness. So I'm going to start in maybe a weird place by talking about in the early months of this pandemic, when we discovered that the COVID virus, bonded to human bodies by attacking what's called the ACE2 receptor. Researchers in China, and it's been replicated others, detected that actually the heart has far more density in terms of ACE2 receptors than the lungs, um, suggesting the possibility that this might be a virus that's attacking our hearts. This summer, there was a study published in Germany looking at 100 people, adults in average age of 40 who had suffered from COVID. This was looking at them after they had tested negative after initially having it, 2 months after the initial diagnosis, 2+ months. Only a third of these people had to be hospitalized, so this was not everyone who was seriously sick cohort. But in this group, again, 2 months after initial infection and after everyone had tested negative, 3/4 of those people showed signs of abnormalities on MRIs taken of their heart, and 60% of the individuals showed signs of inflammation of the heart specifically. So we know that this is a virus that's capable of damaging the heart. What's not known is what percentage of people recover from the physical effects, how long that may take, whether this is going to be a common and prevalent issue, and it's become a loaded issue right now because of both professional sports and college sports reopening, and we're wondering about the risks to young athletes. So one point of clarification there. Exercise itself is far and away the best thing you can do to strengthen your heart. But if you have a damaged heart, if you have a heart inflamed through infection, inflammation, and you have a dilated cardiomyopathy, an inflamed, large, inefficient heart, then exercise is one of the most damaging things you can do. So just to clarify there. So we're talking about how at a physical somatic level, this virus can affect the heart, but clearly at a broader level, this is already affecting our heart, affecting our connections, or affecting our loneliness, our ability to be with one another through quarantine if you're affected, through sheltering in place rules to reduce the risk of inflammation. And humans are social animals. This is part of our DNA, part of our biological being. We are much more like the gorillas and chimps and bonobos which are all group social animals, rather than like our solitary orangutan relatives. And these are all genetically our relatives. One of my favorite examples of the need for social connection is the Unabomber. So Ted Kaczynski was a hermit, a misanthrope, apparently a brilliant mathematician who in the very late 70s and through much of the decade of the 80s hid away in a cabin in Montana and sent bombs to various organizations and people, killing 3 of them, injuring many others. And again, he was living in a place where he could be as isolated and away from humans as possible, and yet he sent a 35,000-page screed to the general press, which was published in the Washington Post, posing his demands of society. So here's a man who's saying, I'm apart from society, I hate it so much, I want to kill you, and yet he's reaching out, he's writing a half novel length screed to reconnect with people. And this is not meant to be snide, but you can even be a germaphobe president who doesn't profess much liking for many people, and yet he was willing enough to put his life at risk and get the COVID virus, despite, again, some of his apparent dislike for humanity. One more point to sort of highlight this need for connection. Our probably in the Western world, our most famous love story, the story of Romeo and Juliet, I would say isn't even particularly a love story. It's a story about separation and the pain of separation and the pain of imagining how intolerable it would be that you're going to always be separated. Whereas, if either Romeo or Juliet had waited a few more hours to see how things panned out, they would probably have been able to figure out a way to be connected, and neither one of them would have killed themselves. So humans need connection. The World Health Organization, our own US government, has posted studies and reminders showing that loneliness itself, and it's been particularly studied in the elderly, but there's no reason to suspect this is only a health threat there, that the effects of loneliness can be as profound as the effects of smoking even less than a pack a day, of being overweight, of diabetes. This has real health implications. So what I'm going to say about connecting in this time of COVID, I mean, people keep saying, yes, oh, we're all in this together, and yes, every continent except Antarctica is has active cases and infections. But just as with the rest of life, we're all in this together differently. So each of us have different scenarios. And the biggest one for this loneliness issue, many people are sheltering in place all alone. And many people are sheltering in place with people either they love to be with or are just barely tolerating. Those huge differences are going to be affecting how connected to the world, how connected to each other you feel. And again, a separate factor from what is going on in your own life in the moment is the uncertainty that hangs over this whole epidemic. So yes, many, many brilliant minds are working on effective treatments, are working on vaccines, but nobody can tell us how soon or how quickly these will be effective in reducing our risk and allowing us to associate in what we had grown accustomed to thinking were the normal ways. So in terms of dealing with connection or the loss of connection, I want to start out with reminding people this is not an all or nothing thing. Just because you're in your room, you are not completely shut out from all people. So what I remind my daughters, when they're high school seniors and they bemoan the lack of contact with their friends and peers, I'm not this old, but I tell them back in 1918, when I was a little boy during the Spanish flu epidemic, you were lucky if when you wrote a letter to your friends, it got there in 4 or 5 weeks, and it would take another 4 or 5 weeks to get back to you. That was much more of an isolation than we're dealing with now. I can also remember in the 70s and 80s, Pac Bell, AT&T, slogans. The telephone was the next best thing to being there, and reach out and touch someone, emphasizing what a powerful tool for connection the phone was. And yet here we're steps beyond that, where we not just have a disembodied voice. You can see a picture, you can see a smile, you can see a frown, you can see a little bit of what someone's life is like and doing. These are all different degrees of connection, and we should emphasize again that connection is not an all or nothing thing. Even a video connection is something, it's a powerful something, and it leads me into talking about how do we make the most of what's going on now and how to minimize the stress and distress. One is, again, remembering that this is not an all or none phenomenon. This is a spectrum of connectivity, and that's important to hold on to. Because if you frame it as I'm cut off from all my family and friends, you're going to feel worse than if you say, oh, I'm Zooming with these people at work, I'm connecting with my family on Skype, I'm calling Aunt Rosie in Idaho. 2, I'd remind people to think of connection as a task, not a test. I have a whole video about this, but what I'm saying here is we often frame it as, oh, I failed to make this connection, or I didn't do, Zoom, I felt too tired to connect with this person this hour, and we frame it as that is a failure, that is something I didn't do well, I didn't do it all. And connection is a lifelong, ongoing task. So if you're being thwarted, if you're blocked, if you're not getting enough of it, I would recommend continuing doing it. The next thing I'm going to say is is the dealing with the uncertainty of it, and I would recommend using the AA slogan of one day at a time. Yes, today may be painful, it may be difficult, but you've already gotten through painful, difficult days. You almost certainly will get through today. Yes, it would be nice to know whether this will be over in a day, a month, a week, 2 months, a year. We don't know that, but if you can get through today, you can almost certainly get through another day. And if it's distressing to think of how long this might be, then focus on what's going on today. Next point is, if others aren't contacting you, then it makes sense for you to reach out to them. So many people I know, sort of sit there thinking, wanting other people to be mind readers, wanting other people in your sphere of influence, whether they're casual friends, good friends, powerful connections, that they should know that you're sitting there wanting them to contact you. If you want to contact them, reach out. The phone, the telephone, the video connection works from both ends. So connected with that, I work with many individuals who feel that, if others aren't contacting me, that means they don't want to have contact with me. And occasionally that may be the true and accurate case, but far more often, if you reach out to them, they'll be happy to interact. And if they don't, they'll let you know. That's not the end of the world. That's not the only person there to contact. So next point, and this is one that can't be underemphasized, is to make the interactions mindful and meaningful. I mean, I have some people, and maybe those with ADHD are more prone to do this, who are talking as they're walking down busy city streets, or who are, even during our appointment, or walking all around their apartment, dropping things, opening things, doing things. If you're multitasking, it's harder to feel connection, it's harder to be present. So I would, again, focus on conveying and being in touch with your feelings and checking in with the other people's feelings, connecting with their thoughts. And I would argue, again, if you focus on that, being there in a video conference or being there on phone, you can check in with thoughts and feelings pretty well. And that's the heart or the essence of connecting with someone on a physical level. Yes, we are missing that, sense of touch, and that the importance of that can vary from person to person. But in terms of meaningfulness of connection, you can still delve pretty deeply into thoughts and feelings if you spend the time to spend attention and focus on that. My next point is to make sure you're making space both on this time and space continuums for your social connections. So this is a strong argument for using a calendar. If you're feeling you're not connecting with people enough, look at your calendar, look at your day, look at what you're already doing and seeing what you can do to augment it. I mean, it may be even taking things out. If you're in a job or work where you're having conference after conference by Zoom, or group conferences particularly, where it doesn't feel you're exposed to lots of people, not really connecting with any, it may be helpful to talk to your boss or people there that we're having too many meetings, too many non-connected, everyone has to be present meetings. And many businesses and organizations they're new to this, they're dealing with this, they're sorting it out. They welcome wanting to, what is going to work for their people in their network. So don't be shy of asking for more space where there can be one-on-one connections rather than group connections. So scheduling I would also encourage people to set aside, even if you're locked into a one-room apartment, setting up special or separate physical spaces for your social connecting versus your work connecting, so that you can be in a different mindset, even if that means shifting to a different corner of the bed for when you're Zooming at work versus when you're Zooming at your home. I'd also suggest, some playfulness, that if it takes some minor adjustment of clothing, putting on a bow tie, putting on a special hat, putting on some article of clothing or accessory that conveys to you, I am in social mode right now. I am trying to connect with you in a person mode rather than I'm in a more business mode where I may just be trying to convey information. So my next point is adding variety. I mean, even the same Zoom format in the same special area of your apartment can get tired and dull. So, you know, introduce some variety. I mean, particularly it can be helpful throwing in a phone call occasionally rather than having a visual contact. And again, even though we have less information in the phone contact, for some people that makes them be more present to focus on more on sort of imagining how they can see the other person's facial features, other characteristics of how they're behaving. I remember reading recently that Terry Gross, the NPR interviewer, one of the most famous, empathetic, and informative interviewers of our era, actually prefers, a phone audio-only hookup to seeing people because she can more thoroughly get into the mind or get into the empathetic zone with her interview subjects. So another way of focusing on variety or breaking things up, many people get into rotes or patterns in how they're interacting, and I would recommend thinking in sort of 3 different time zones. If what you're always doing with a friend or family that's cross country or cross town when you connect by Zoom or internet, if all that you're doing is sort of recounting daily activities, it may be useful to go back and reminisce about something in the more distant past, some favorite time or memory. Or it may be useful to talk about plans for the future, even though the specificity may be on hold now that we don't know when we'll be able to do them, but it can be useful for shaking up again that time frame, so you're not locked into it. So the other things I'll move on to are so what about the people who don't have anyone in their life that they can think of or are limited by connectivity, their technical ends of this? And I'll remind people that in our modern world, more people have cell phones and have access to toilets or clean and running water, which again is a testament itself to the need to connect. So one, there are dozens and dozens now of chat apps where you can talk to a stranger. I know that may sound weird or different, but connecting to humans is powerful. It's the most effective tool for not feeling alone in the world. And these are other people in these chat apps who want to connect with someone else. Again, there are dozens and dozens of them. Just Google stranger or search stranger chat, and you'll find dozens of companies that are doing this worldwide. Some of them are completely random. Some of them you can specify with exquisite detail what type of person you're looking for chatting with. And then I'm going to move on from chatting with this stranger to other levels of connection. And one thing that's seen a huge surge during the shutdown is connecting with animals. Having a pet is not the same thing as a human, but again, getting back to we're talking about a spectrum instead of making this an all or none issue. Pets are wonderful resources, wonderful ways to feel connected to a living thing, wonderful way to feel love. And pet adoptions have gone up dramatically. What I would say is if you're planning on getting a pet, particularly a cat or a dog, plan ahead so that when we have reduced restrictions, when we are able to go out or maybe go to work, that you have a plan for dealing with that rather than abandoning an animal. But even a goldfish in a bowl is a connection to another life form that can have a positive, life-affirming, not being alone in the world effect. And I'll sort of my last point is to go even further on the distance among the world spectrum of living things. And if an animal is not an option in your space, consider a houseplant. Consider a living thing that you can see growing, living, creating oxygen for you while you help it with adding carbon dioxide to the world. If you can't have a plant in your